Hi, I'm just testing. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of CATS, Center for Advancement of Traditional Building Technology and Skills, I welcome all the speakers and each one of you to the special Play Story session of Festival of Places 2020, jointly hosted by Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, IGNC New Delhi, and CATS. The Festival of Places is an idea born out of the spirit of volunteerism to come together, collaborate, co create, and celebrate places that nurture health, happiness, and foster community living. The Festival of Places aims to bring people, places, and memories and their interrelationships at the forefront of public discussion. It envisions to investigate places, the people who inhabit them, the collective and individual memories that are integral to places, and present them in a new way to leverage discussions on the future of public spaces. It provides an opportunity to people for sharing their personal narratives. Moreover, the festival aims to help discover the much overlooked human dimension of spaces. We at CATS feel very strongly about the dismal state of public spaces in our cities and firmly believe change in the way we think, talk, and use public spaces can only begin at the grassroots by creatively engaging people with places and empowering them to make a difference to the places and spaces around. The main highlight of the festival this year is Play Stories, a series of online storytelling sessions that will help understand the hidden dimensions, multiple interpretations, and varied memories associated with places, highlighting distinct characteristics of places as well as unraveling the bond that people have with places, a connection that lives through their experiences. Special Play Story Sessions is a series of interesting storytelling sessions by subject experts from diverse fields. These sessions focused on public spaces have been planned around four pertinent themes. The theme for the Special Play Story Session 2 is interaction and sociability in public spaces. Public spaces are at the heart of urban living, an extension of the private realm into the public domain. According to Jan Gehl, the famous Danish architect and urban designer, who says, "We shape the cities and they shape us." Public spaces bring together people from all walks of life and promote intermingling of different sections of the society. They are spaces where people come together to transact business or for leisure and recreation. Public spaces facilitate sharing and exchange of ideas and therefore also become staging grounds for collective voices of dissent. This session will explore the idea of public spaces as places, as fluid, changeable, dynamic contexts of social interaction and memory, as points of intersection supporting networks of social relations as people constantly interact with them. When designed sensitively, public spaces have the potential of bringing together communities and strengthening social ties and bonding that is fast disappearing from urban areas. This session will also explore how and in what manner do different public spaces promote or discourage interaction and sociability. Another very critical and much overlooked aspect of public spaces is their contribution to the physical and emotional well being of people. The session will therefore also explore how access to public spaces can impact physical and emotional well being of communities. The COVID-19 pandemic is one such event which has impacted people's access to public spaces, both for leisure and commerce, greatly impacting the livelihoods of many. We are happy to have with us this evening a very interesting mix of speakers. Professor Dr. Amit Hajela, Director, College of Architecture, Vastukala Academy, New Delhi. Ms. Deepshika Sinha, Urban Designer and Architect, Program Coordinator, Rahagiri Foundation, and Ms. Shubhra Puri, Founder of Gurgaon First, both representing Rahagiri Foundation. We also have Ms. Neeta Mishra, Executive Director, Tathagat Foundation. We begin with a play story by Professor Dr. Amit Hajela, which has a very interesting title, and the story is equally captivating. The title of the play story is Place Associations, A Story of Town and Gown. Professor Amit Hajela is an architect and urban designer involved in professional practice, academics, and research since the last 30 years. He is a fellow of the Indian Institute of Architects, fellow and founding member of Institute of Urban Designers India, expert member on Smart Cities program, and jury member for various national architectural design competitions and awards. The core area of his work are in the areas of urban design, campus design and planning, institutional buildings for higher education with high-end AV integration, healthcare facility planning, corporate offices, interiors, with focus on sustainable design and green campuses. At present, he is a visiting professor at the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, adjunct professor, Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, and director, College of Architecture, Vastukala Academy, New Delhi, having made significant contribution to the undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral programs as external expert and board of studies member. He has several publications at national and international level to his credit, besides besides having delivered several keynote lectures at national and international forums. Uh, Everyone can ask questions in this session. You can ask your questions personally as well, but please do write them in the chat box first and we will take them one by one. I would now like to invite Professor Amit Hajela to share with us his play story.
Thank you, Urvashi, for inviting College of Architecture, Vastukala Academy to this celebration of public spaces. It's a great event, it's a great conception. And the way the entire event has been conceived, I think we have a lot of interesting stories to share. And this certainly brings the public spaces to the forefront of our public discourse. So I have a small story to share with you all. And before I begin to share, I think it's important that we quickly understand the value of public places in our cities. These public spaces could be in varied scales, in different typologies, in different approaches in which they are being perceived and they are being experienced by people. But I think it's the kind of experience that these public spaces offer to the people. They get ingrained in the memories and this have a lasting impact for all the inhabitants of the place. They might be a permanent inhabitant or might be a visitor, but they continue to remain and have a very special place in the memory of our people. And consequently, the place associations become very, very critical to our understanding of not only associating ourselves with these places, but also in creation of those public spaces, given the fact that the cities are bound to change and transform with time. But what stays as static or probably defined is that space which gets transformed with time, but then it is the kind of functions and the kind of activities that they support that they make them very, very useful and very, very critical to our memory. And probably it is also important and significant for us to look at those place associations as an important part of our engagement with our cities. So going ahead from here, I'd quickly like to share with you uh, a few typologies of public spaces, and they could be the festive markets that we see and that we celebrate during festive times in our countries. And they have a different kind of an image and a different kind of a response as we experience them over a period of time. And they always become places of celebration, and they get appropriated by people in different ways. Uh, we see a fantastic fusion of the formal sector and the informal sector coming together, and both coexist in that public domain. And probably it becomes a place for social engagement, social interactions, and they leave a lasting impact for us to live with. Now, here are some examples of how the public places have been appropriated, have been transformed, and the kind of significance that we associate to public places. I mean, the recent transformation of the Karol Bagh and the Ajmal Khan Road, which has been again reclaimed for the people as against for the motor cars, become significant aspects of our engagement with our cities. Going ahead, the Chandni Chowk experiment and the transformation and the redevelopment of Chandni Chowk yet brings again the kind of old memories of the place and how this becomes such a vibrant place in the fabric of our city, which has been celebrated over centuries, and they continue to become celebrated. But however, the upgradation of these areas bring in more vibrancy and more richness for the engagement of our people. Yet again, the example that we see of the heritage street around the precincts of the Golden Temple, Amritsar, again become a fantastic example of how the public places have been created and how people have now responded to these public places. They have great memories of this place and they have great associations with this place, and they continue to inhabit, and probably they have it has given a different meaning to the entire place over a period of time. I mean, it could be places which are being celebrated by people in different ways, could be marketplaces, market precincts, or maybe waterfronts, which have become very, very critical in our city structure. This is maybe an example of the Kakaria Lake at Ahmedabad, which was being redeveloped and probably brought to the people of Ahmedabad, and how it has become a significant place now, which is being frequented by so many people from the city and from outside the city. The Sabarmati riverfront, as you all know, is yet another example of creation of public domain and bringing and rejuvenating the river and bringing it back to the people and creating a great public domain. Now, these are the places where people interact, they socialize, and they also become great places of recreation, and they have a lasting impact in their memories for years to come. The example that you see here is an example of how the old Sunday market used to exist on a very dried floodplain zone of the Sabarmati River, and now has become another vibrant place. But the same place probably appropriates itself in the same way as it used to be appropriated earlier, and it continues to transact similar kind of business as it used to transact earlier. But then it becomes a place for the people. It becomes a significant place of our association, of our everyday life that we engage with. Similarly, there's some great examples of the transformations and development of riverfront in Dubai. And here we see the kinds of development as part of the smart cities and development or an area-based development through smart city program for the lake edge of Bhopal. And then maybe we have some great associations of these places through series of events. And it's a celebration time in Ahmedabad again with the Garba period and maybe the Navratri period that we celebrate. Yet again, we see a place which transforms with people. It's almost about 1.5 crore people converging at one particular place. It's the Kumbh Mela at Allahabad. Now, this is a part of a floodplain zone which never could be developed as a waterfront. Reason being that this entire area is submerged in water during the monsoons. And it is only from the period post-September till the time of Kumbh, which is early January, that the entire city gets laid out. And what you see in these pictures is how that entire city with all the infrastructure has been laid out. This has probably attracted people across the globe, where the University of Harvard came to Allahabad through 9 departments to study that how India manages to accommodate this quantum of congregation at one particular place. But then these become imageable places. They became places with great events, and they leave a lasting impact in our minds. Many of these place associations could also be associated with some grand landmarks, maybe India Gate lawns, or maybe the precincts of Moti Masjid at Bhopal, the old church in Goa, or the Maitri Mandir in Auroville. Some of these have their grandeur and the kind of place making which has been done in these places are immense, and they certainly are landmarks, and they are part of our integral memory. Now we have another very fine example of a place being appropriated and transformed into a very, very vibrant public place. That's the Quincy Market at Boston. Uh, just to go back to history, this was part of a trading edge on the seashore, and where a lot of warehouses existed, which later was being put under adaptive reuse and transformed into a very grand public space and one of the finest public places across the globe. Here, I would like to share with you some examples and probably the most recent intervention of the public place as part of the City Hall Square that we see, which is getting transformed. This is the existing place which I happened to visit way back in 2008, and now is into this phase of transformation and is going to transform with the new proposal which has been made by Sasaki. And very soon we would see the new transformed public space of the City Hall Square of Boston, which is very, very integral to the downtown of the city of Boston. Here we see this kind of grand plaza and public space, and also the memorial, which was the Holocaust Memorial, next to the Quincy Market. And here is the old Quincy Market, which is vibrant, where people come, appropriate, and then they use this place in different ways, and is being celebrated through the year during different times. And you can see the way people come in here. It's become a vibrant place, a very robust place for different kinds of activities. And now this, what would you see is the transformed place, which is their proposal for the transformation of the City Hall Square in Boston. And this is the before and the after image that you can see, which will transform with time. So now this plaza has been interjected with series of small pockets of green spaces and an articulation of this space to orient people from the Cambridge Street to the Congress Street and to the Quincy Market. Now, series of these proposals are very interesting, and probably will provide a new dimension to the city of Boston. Now, here is something which is very dear to me, is the city of Roorkee, and that's where the story of town and gown begins. The city of Roorkee, if you go historically, dates back to the early 17th century, and subsequently came into limelight around 1840, when the Upper Ganges Canal was being constructed. And earlier it was basically an agrarian economy, and it was ruled by a Rajput chieftain, and the city gets its name from his wife named Roori, and then it transformed into a city called Roorkee. It's essentially a educational center, well known for the engineering college and the allied institutions which it has supported in form of the research institutes which came. But essentially, this town grew as a consequence of the university, and which was formerly known as the University of Roorkee, and now the popular Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. Roorkee had the distinction of having been designated as the most literate city in India way back in the year 1992. And now the average literacy rate of the city is almost about 89%, having an area of 8.1 square kilometers and a population of over about 3 lakhs. The city of Roorkee is actually was developed around the canal. The old settlement was on the right bank of the river Ganges, Upper Ganga Canal, and then the new development post 1840 came onto the left bank of the Ganga Canal, which has the IIT campus, the cantonment, and of course now the city is spreading more on the now southwestern side, with the entire city getting industrialized post creation of the state of Uttarakhand. And now it's becoming a very important center to house several industries in and around us. Of course, it forms a great connection and almost seamless connection to the pilgrim city of Haridwar, and which probably now constitutes the integral development of the city with Haridwar under the Haridwar and Roorkee Development Authority. Now, these are the small precincts that you see of the city on either sides of the canal. Uh, Primarily, the Indian Institute of Technology, which was University of Roorkee, almost seamlessly fusing into the city. It was very difficult to define where the city begins or where the campus begins. There was a phenomenal synergy amongst the university community and the community from the city, which interacted at the peripheries of the campus and within the campus. The campus had some great public spaces, and each was being frequented by people during different times of the day. And the activities of the institute and the university were also the activities of the city. And people became integral to those celebration of those activities, whether it be the annual regatta of the university or the annual sports meet of the university, or a celebration of students' hobbies as part of the Hobbies Club event, which was being celebrated for almost 1 week, where the student talent was being presented to the people. And this legacy of celebration and the kind of interactions that it offered to the people from the campus and from the city became integral, and it certainly continues to be celebrated even today. The entire campus of IIT Roorkee is about 356 acres, and it has also given space to many other research institutes, such as the Central Building Research Institute Roorkee, established way back in 1952, and then the Irrigation Research Institute, and also the National Institute of Hydrology. Uh, the significant part of this is what the canal offered, and what the canal could transform. And probably, had the canal not been there, this great institution would not have been there, and this great city would not have been there. Now, going back to the way and to probably look into the history of the canal, and the canal actually has been cut out through a barrage, which is known as the Bhim Goda Dam at Haridwar. And the water that you see at the famous Har Ki Pauri is the water which has been taken off the mainstream of Ganga and brought into Har Ki Pauri. And eventually, this water is what goes and transforms into the Upper Ganges Canal. The canal, actually, the work on the canal started way back in 1840. And subsequently, it was in 1845 that the workshop was being established along with an iron foundry to support the construction activity of the Upper Ganges Canal. It's important that we recognize another important event, that usually we have been told that the first train that ran in India was in 1953 between Bombay and Thane. But the reality is that the first locomotive ran between Roorkee and a place called Piran Kaliar, which is about 10 kilometers from Roorkee. This locomotive was specially shipped from England, and it was being used to transport the material. They had a lot of earth which was being excavated from the canal, and it had to be transported for the construction purposes. So it was in 1951 that the first railway track was being laid, and the first train ran between Roorkee and Rankalier. This is the final outcome of the canal, which started operating way back in 1854. Now, we can't miss this important center of pilgrimage, which is known as Piran Kaliar. It's about 10 kilometers from Roorkee. It's a resting place of a Sufi saint who was a disciple of Baba Farid. And he used to be part of the langar and the kitchen of Baba Farid. And then subsequently he came here, and this became a resting place for this great Sufi saint. And today, this place is vibrant with people when during the period of Urs, where the people from all across the globe come here to pay their homage, and it's one of the important shrines for the Islamic community. People come here and then they sing qawwalis, and it's being celebrated along with a fair through those 15 days of Urs. The well-known engineering feat of the Upper Ganges Canal was the aqueduct, which was being constructed in 1845 when the canal was being constructed. Now, the entire stretch from Roorkee to Haridwar has some great engineering feats, and then they have their own story to tell. These aqueducts were being made, and multiple of them, right from a place called Bahadrabad onwards to Roorkee. Uh, Roorkee, primarily being in the foothills of the Shivaliks, has series of seasonal rivers which flow in and around it. And the city of Roorkee was initially a settlement and a hamlet next to the river Solani. But then here we see that there are multiple such important engineering feats that we see. One where the canal flows below the river, and there's an aqueduct there after Bahadrabad. The second point is at Dhanori, which is where the seasonal river and the canal, the water converge and they meet, and the total quantum of water which is to be maintained in the canal is being retained through the gates of the barrage, and the excess water goes out. And the third is at Roorkee itself, where the river flows below and the canal flows above. So this series of aqueducts became very critical. They're all brick masonry structured through series of arch structures and brick piers which existed. These are the earlier archival images of the aqueduct of the Upper Ganges Canal. And now we see that very recently the parallel canal was being made as part of the World Bank project to meet the needs of water and for irrigation purposes. And this is the new aqueduct which has been constructed as part of the World Bank project for this. Now, this is the point where the two canals comes and converge at Roorkee, because there was no space to have a parallel canal running through the fabric of the city, but they become really imageable, and those edges are so critical where people now celebrate the water edge of the canal. These are some of the images of the new aqueduct and how they come together, and they are part of the great engineering feats. This particular thing is very dear to me, and it's very nostalgic when I see. What you see here are those canal lining tiles. They're actually clay tiles. It's nostalgic for me because it was developed by my father while he was in Central Building Research Institute as part of the World Bank project. And these became critical to the lining of the entire canal, of the new canal which runs from Haridwar to Aligarh. And eventually, Mr. Stein used those tiles as part of the rat trap bond and what you see as the facade of the India Habitat Center, Delhi. The Thomson Engineering College, as we know, was established in 1847 by the Lieutenant Governor James Thomson. And the initial intake of this university or the college was only 8 students who were admitted as part of the engineering course. And then subsequently, the people from the British Army, which were almost about 10 in number, were inducted to the engineering course. They were supposed to be trained as overseers to look at the various projects which were being floated by the British government, whether it be construction of roads, canals, and other infrastructure in the country. And subsequently, they also trained Indians who were wanting to engage themselves with surveying and leveling. Roorkee became an important center for the surveying instruments and manufacture of surveying instruments, and also came alongside a very important government press, which published all these documents for the people. Here at the bottom, you see a small cluster of these pine trees, which was probably, which are almost about 150 years plus. maybe planted by some British army officer. And they're the only cluster of pine trees which are right in front of the main building of the university. And we see the statue of the founder, which is Lieutenant Governor James Thompson. The another celebrated place is the Convocation Hall, which was the hangar, and which also was being used by the university to film various Hindi cinema for the students at different points in time, and but now has been refurbished as the major convocation hall of the university. Right in the middle of the campus has series of important religious buildings, which included St. John's Church, which is part of the square of the convocation hall. And also we have a temple and a mosque integral to the campus. The new buildings which have added, which is the new library building of the university, and then series of these research institutions like CBRI Roorkee, National Institute of Hydrology, and the IRI. The celebration of the student activities and functions in form of the sporting activities became integral to the city, and it was for the entire city to participate in most of the inter-university meets, and also as part of the annual athletic meets. University of Roorkee was known for the annual inter-university regatta, which happens on the canal of the University of Roorkee, and probably the rowers of the University of Roorkee have also represented India at different points in time. Another important establishment at Roorkee is the Bengal Engineers and Group Center, which was established in 1853 by the Britishers, and is the first engineering corps of the Indian Army, having achieved lots of laurels over their existence over the last several decades. Um, Now, here are some of those important institutions which synergized amongst themselves, and it was almost collaborative work that happened in the city, and it continues to happen. And now the entire canal has been spanned by a couple of these important bridges and different connections to cross the threshold of the canal. The city has an old market street, which has evolved with time, appropriated in different ways by different people. The town hall of the university of the city was established in the year 1858, and thereafter it continues to be an important seat of public activity. We see different kinds of activities and the transformation of the canal front now being used in different ways by the people. We see some important public squares which have some fantastic interactions that people had, and it marks the edge of the campus and the city. This square had a cinema hall and also a small tea stall right at the corner that you see, which served the students late at night. And then the entrance of the university from this side was marked by the Century Gate, which was to commemorate the 100 years of the campus. And now this has become into a vibrant place. Of course, it gets to be congested with time, but then the main market street, which we see, becomes critical to the pedestrians in the evenings, and it's very vibrant, and some great interactions happen in that street. What you see is here is a small is a lion which was being erected, and this lion basically states that it is the depth of the canal here is very is too much, and one has to be careful. And this eventually also became the logo of the University of Roorkee. And now we see different marketplaces being appropriated by people in different ways, and it continues to be a very vibrant public place. And it's also being celebrated in different ways during different parts of the city. So it's a small story of the town and the gown which evolved, and probably the kind of social connections and the social bond that we have with the people of Roorkee, or between people of Roorkee, and the way we interact with each other has left a great mark on my life. And probably there are some great virtues. The culture of the city, which probably offered, has made me probably very I would say sensitive to the human values and social structure, the social bond of the place has made me more empathetic, and probably that culture flows in our blood. And there's hardly any time when what one would not like to go back to this place, maybe to rejuvenate yourself, and it is always so therapeutic. So thank you very much. I hope you would celebrate with me this is small town as and when you go and get an opportunity to visit Turkey. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, sir, for your very interesting presentation, taking us down the memory lane, how, the city of Roorkee evolved and the importance and significance of the canal in this city. I would now like to introduce the next speakers of the session, Ms. Deepshika Sinha and Ms. Shubhra Puri. Deepshika is an architect and urban designer, a young professional in the mobility sector with an approach to understanding urban confluence. She has experience of working in architectural studios, landscape and design firms around Delhi NCR. Currently, she is working as a program coordinator with Ragiri Foundation, engaging people to reclaim public spaces, especially streets, simultaneously capacitating government agencies for executing tactical urbanism and designing streets that encourage active mobility around Gurugram. She closely works with WRI transport team, volunteering for executing pop-up junctions and safe school zones. Deepshika holds a master's degree in urban design from SPA Delhi and has graduated as an architect from School of Planning and Architecture, Bhopal. An artist at heart, architect by training, and urbanist at the core, she strives to search for ideal urban situations, negotiating real-world conditions. Shubhra Puri is founder of Gurgaon First, a social enterprise that is dedicated to giving a credible voice to stakeholders of Gurugram through workshops, roundtables, and handbooks with a vision to make Gurugram a sustainable, empowered, and inclusive city. Gurgaon First has conducted 47 public workshops and published 4 handbooks for Gurugram since its inception in 2012. The workshops have been in the areas of waste, solar water, sustainability, women's safety, sustainable mobility, and youth empowerment through active engagement with local authorities, ministries, MLAs, as well as other social groups and NGOs. Ms. Puri has been writing extensively in various media on issues concerning Gurugram. Since October 2018, she has been writing a regular column with Hindustan Times called Human Impact. Besides this, she is an advisor for the One Stop Center for Women in Gurugram, initiated by the District Commissioner, an advisor to Kalagram, a society for promotion of arts in Gurugram, and a member of the District Development Coordination and Monitoring Committee, Gurugram, set up to monitor implementation of government schemes in the district as a civil society representative. He is also a trustee with Ragiri Foundation and also part of ICC committee under prevention of sexual harassment for 2 private organizations. As an MBA, she started her career as a business journalist with the Economic Times in 1995 and later worked as editor content for Powerline and India Infrastructure magazines at India Infrastructure Publishing Private Limited, based in New Delhi, where she was involved with research and writing on developmental policy and regulatory issues concerning the infrastructure sector. I now invite Ms. Deepshika Sinha and Ms. Shubhra Puri to jointly present their play story titled Rahagiri Rethinking Streets, Change the Notion.
Thank you, Urvashi, for inviting us to speak today. Thank you, Festival of Places, for giving us an opportunity to showcase the story of Gurugram and Rahagiri. Mr. Hajela, it was a very vivid presentation. And just as you took us back to history, we would start with the history of Gurugram, and the history of Rahagiri, which are both intertwined with each other. We'll go to the first presentation. Deepshika is actually showing the presentation while I'll be speaking some part of it, and later on Deepshika is going to take on from me. So as we all know, Gurugram dates back to the times of Mahabharata, and it was actually given, the city or this town or this village was given as a gift to Guru Dronacharya, who was the teacher of Kauravas and Pandavas. From there, during Akbar reign, Gurugram fell within the governing region of Delhi and Agra. And by 1803, most of it had come under the British rule. And the town was actually then an army unit, a cavalry unit posted to watch the army of Begum Samru of Sirdhana. From there, after that, eventually it came completely under the direct control of the British. And after the revolt of 1857, it was transferred from the northwest provinces to Punjab province. So basically, it came down to the province of Punjab. And of course, then we got the independence, and in 1966, the city came under the administration of Haryana from Punjab, and as we created a new state. But all through and through, it was basically a farmland. Till the 80s, most of it was still farmlands owned by farmers, or it had land under the government. And basically, Gurgaon was talked about as Delhi's sleepy green backyard. The real transformation of the city has actually happened in the last 30 years. It has been a very dramatic transformation, but very, very, very transformational changes. First change was that Maruti Udyog decided to set up a manufacturing unit in the late 70s. And soon Hero Honda also set its plant in the city. And basically it became an auto ancillary hub and auto hub. Then DLF Limited entered it as a prime developer, as a prime real estate developer. It built posh residential areas and the first office space for GE. And then other developers followed suit like Unitech, etc. And very soon, this city became an industrial, a residential, a commercial hub. Today, there are about 250 Fortune 500 companies which are located in Gurgaon. And as I said, Gurgaon is very much a nerve center of residential, commercial, and industrial township. Next slide. Yes, Gurugram now has multiple identities. It is the second largest city in Haryana. It is the city with one of the highest per capita incomes after Chandigarh and Mumbai. It is also called the Millennial City, which is what it is famously known as, with its vast array of modern commercial malls, hospitals, cyber parks, and high-tech offices. So there has been a great transformation. Very interestingly, Gurugram is also the golden goose city of Haryana, because almost 60% of Haryana's revenue comes from Gurgaon by way of excise duty, sales tax, stamp duty, and registration. In 2016, the city also changed its name from Gurgaon to Gurugram to better reflect its historical heritage. While that happened, there was a gap as to who does Gurugram really belong to. Does it belong to the people who actually came as retired people, as to live in large houses in Gurugram, or does it belong to the new youngsters, the generation that came here for looking for smart jobs, for jobs in the IT sector, or did Gurugram belong to the old Gurgaoites who were actually pushed to the fringes while new development and new people set forth in the city? So the question was, who did Gurugram belong to? And there was a gap in sense of belongingness in the city. So as I said, there was a huge potential of shared culture, a shared culture that had the old people of Gurugram and also embraced the new settlers in Gurugram. We always call Gurugram as a migrant city, whether it is the lower income migrants or the new migrants, the higher income migrants. But basically, it's been a migrant city all through. The real challenges is how to create a sense of belongingness for the citizens. This can come through engagement, inclusivity, and empowerment. Next slide. So what is this shared, unshared culture? Is that visible? Now, one of the attempts that was made to have that sense of belongingness, it can be through various means, but one means was Rahagiri Day. And Rahagiri came to the city in November 2013. The day Rahagiri Day was celebrated, that day on 17th November, citizens came to the streets. There was a sense of belongingness. There was a sense of freedom. There was a sense of, a shared legacy. There was a sense of, spirit and youth. From here on, I think Deepshikha will tell us how Rahagiri has been able to transform the city's public spaces and the city's streets. Over to you, Deepshikha.
Thank you, Shubhra. So I will start from the very basic question that how we know our public spaces, what do we feel our public spaces stand for? Currently, what we see is we have a set of formal public spaces and then informal public spaces. We have a lot of parks and gardens and markets where a lot of people come, play, rest, meet, chat. And then some of these public spaces are private public spaces, institutional complexes, or heritage sites, which are affordable to a set of people and not accessible to the rest. And then there are informal public spaces, which we talk about the cobbler sitting under the tree, the nukkar where the chaiwala stands, the transport nodes, the bus stops where people eat, loiter, and take a nap. So these are the kind of public spaces that we see around us. But there is a large potential of these public spaces that we still haven't explored fully or we don't acknowledge completely, is these places are also the places of expression, the celebration. We see puja pandals coming up, these temporal activities happening, the exchange, the debate, the discussions. These are also the spaces of campaigns and protest, which we don't want to accept. But then these are also the places of livelihood for so many vendors, for so many fruit walas, the vegetable seller. These are also the spaces for public health. Recently, we saw during the pandemic, a lot of people wanted to come out of their houses to just run, sit, play, cycle. So these spaces are also for public health, and these are flexible spaces which change their mood throughout the day, throughout different seasons, throughout the year. And these are spaces for all, which have to be democratic for all. So are these public spaces, what are streets public spaces? Streets are the public spaces where a lot of shared legacy and shared usage is seen. Every one of us have a sense of belongingness or sense of relatedness to our streets. As per NACTO, more than 80% of our public spaces are streets or roads. So streets and roads are not just the connectors or the communication from one point to the other point happens here, but also these are the front yard of our houses. These are also potential areas to foster a lot of business activities. So during Rahagiri, these streets means a lot of sociability, a lot of interaction happening at these spaces. During Rahagiri, we reclaim these streets as public spaces to entertain healthy lifestyle, to create happy communities, to facilitate these areas for active mobility, like to walk, to cycle, to jog. These are also the places where we see a lot of people from different backgrounds, cultures, abilities come out, and a lot of vulnerable population get to experience the street in a very different way. So in a way, we are also demonstrating model streets which are safe and inclusive and making a city complete in a manner. And these are the kind of spaces we want our sustainable infrastructure to develop into. This is how we can make our cities more sustainable. In Rahagiri, during the Rahagiri Day, we try to encourage sustainable mobility, to make communities more active by using streets for healthy lifestyle and have an inclusive environment for all to experience. So we are talking about a fundamental shift in day-to-day experience and negotiations around commute as well. What do we do at Rahagiri Day? We enable streets to become what they should be. People come out to run, people come out to exercise, they paint, they exchange, they talk, they create memories, and there could be a lot of activities that you can see in any Rahagiri Day. So these are our experiences of making memories by sheer place making, very basic. And then this is also an experiment where you create public space and create sociability and the interaction that people need. So how do we achieve these healthy streets? We have basic strategies, not just to have these pop-up events, but also to ensure a large-scale change. First of all, we endeavor to have behavioral and mindset changed amongst people and also people of authority by experiencing a real street modification. People are able to relate and are able to create that sense of belongingness to their neighborhood areas. We also, during the pandemic times, we tried to sustain our communication to people with extensive public outreach. We held awareness campaigns through online communication, and we collaborated with a lot of government departments, organizations, citizen groups, and other NGOs with the same vision. These are also the demonstration of changing the entire street is also a capacity building exercise for all city stakeholders. These become the ground of education where people can experience how it's changing, and different RWA groups, different people come out to discuss. We also conduct various workshops and training sessions for school kids, parents, and RWA groups. This mounts to and lead us to aid government agencies and to make them understand better how these mobility infrastructure can be plugged in. So there are these state and city level mechanisms that we are pushing forward. Haryana Vision Zero is one example where we have aimed to achieve zero road fatalities. And then the final strategy is also to aid these government departments with technical support to help them create these streets and to sustain them over a period of time. What we learn with every reclamation during Rahagiri Day is public spaces are flexible. Their innate quality is to entertain interaction and social ties, which people themselves are capable of. With every event, we know that spaces can be made safe if they are made for people and not for cars. They can be made more inclusive and equitable. To have a long time mindset change, we have to have consistent engagement with government institutions and citizen. And by basic placemaking, this is a great tool to try, learn, amend, and execute what we want our streets to be. So we know we are succeeding when people start taking ownership of their land. So Rahagiri Day has traveled to more than 75 cities in past 6 years. And even in Gurgaon, we have activated more than 14 locations. Now we are also working with the government departments to create 5 model streets, which can have these healthy activities all through. I would like to end with 3 basic points for us as citizens to change our notion by forming 3 basic perspectives that streets are public spaces, and these streets, we need to reclaim our streets to include all genders, age, abilities, and economies. We need to respect other, and then we need to reimagine how we want our streets to be, and of course, practice the same. So Shubhra will take over again to conclude the presentation.
Yeah, as they say, a picture speaks 1,000 words. These are vivid pictures of Rahagiri Day in Gurugram, and you can see how children are enjoying on the streets, playing freely. The next one shows people exercising, having fun, and also meeting each other in a different way. This is people undertaking cycling, on the streets and enjoying a cycle ride with each other. The next one is about streets with zero road crashes. We're also aiming to make streets safer for the traffic. Next slide. Yeah, these are old people who normally stay indoors, coming out and enjoying and reclaiming their share of the streets. Here we see how, through various government programs of Swachh Bharat missions or any other government message that we would want to convey, we convey it through Rahagiri, and people come together for that. People of all backgrounds, genders, and abilities also taking part in Rahagiri Day. And here, as people feel highly engaged, and there is a culture of positivity, of enthusiasm, of participation. There are joys of healthy and happy life that Rahagiri signifies. Another few pictures of kids out on the streets and having their day. and playing games, old games that have that we don't see anymore. These are women groups celebrating with each other, and people playing pittu, old games that are being revived again, traditional games, and people coming out for dance and expression, self-expression, art, music. This is music, and people taking part in various cycling exercises, giving various social messages, and just playing with each other. So why don't you, while these images go on, we thank you, for this opportunity. You could write to us on rahagirifoundation@gmail.com and at these social handles. Join us to make Gurugram an empowered, sustainable, and an inclusive city and a safe city. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Many thanks, Deepshika and Shubhra, for your very interesting presentation. In fact, what Rahagiri has been doing is very remarkable in terms of creating a platform for people to voice their concerns. And the most important thing is to actually get them a taste of what public spaces can be, what is the potential and what are the possibilities, so that we can bring about lasting change. I would now like to introduce the next speaker for the session, Ms. Neeta Mishra. Neeta is Executive Director, Tathagat Foundation, and a postgraduate in psychology from Delhi University. She is a certified positive psychologist from Penn University, USA. She has an experience of over 10 years in the field of childcare, education, psychosocial support, wellness, and resilience. She has set up a non-profit organization, Tathagat Foundation, dedicated to promoting holistic health, meaningful education, and meditation. I now invite Neeta to present her story titled Public Spaces and Their Implication on Well-Being.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My apologies for not being able to share a video of myself because there's something wrong with the camera. I hope all of you are happy and well. The topic for today that I would be covering during this session is public spaces and their implication on well-being. At the start, let me share some of my personal images of how different spaces hold different value in my life and how they contribute to the sense of well-being in my life. The first is when places become spaces for social interaction. So the first picture that I have here is of the metro station, the stairs on the metro station, where we as friends, we came together and we socialized at that particular place. The second picture is of a playground where people I met for the first time, we interacted together and we created a bond, and we're still friends till date. Now, the second lot that I would like to talk about is how places create memory and attachments. Okay, so the first picture is of this auto that was placed at a place, and all of us got together and took a picture. So this became a memory of that particular place. The second picture is of this place in the nature, how everybody has smiles on their faces. Now the third lot of pictures that I would like to talk about is when places become a route for escape. So the first picture is of a park. When you go through a stressful day, you go out in the park, just look at the world go by, and it helps you calm down. The second picture is of me in the nature, of reflections, of thinking about what matters, of having a me time, and with people around us. The third picture is a picture from Hoskas, which had a painted wall, and it is just an escape route from whatever is around the hustle bustle of the city. Now the next lot of pictures I'll talk about is when there's space for physical activity. Now the first picture is of my society, where parking lot was given for people to play badminton. How it helped people socialize, interact more, and become a more bonded kind of a society where people could talk to each other. Otherwise, me being an introvert, used to stay at home and not really go out and do anything about in the society. Okay, so these are some of my personal experiences of how spaces and places impacted me and my idea of well-being. This now I'll talk about what is well-being. Okay, so well-being is a concept that is when you're happy and healthy. This is the Oxford definition of what well-being is. Now, well-being does not occur as a sole concept. It is a combination of a lot of aspects. Now, these aspects are your physical health, your social health, your mental and psychological health, your spiritual health, and also your economic health. Okay, together they all have to be in harmony for you to have a sense or a feeling of well-being. Now, I will talk about the story of my days in the city called Delhi. Okay. Now, if I start my day today, I'll be at point A near Akshardham. Then I'll go to Delhi near Safdarjung. I'll work there, go to probably point C and come back home. Mostly no time for socialization and building relationships. But if we see research studies in a longitudinal study at Harvard, people were the most happy in old age, not with materialistic achievements or any such other achievements, but with people who had close relationships and had relationships that were strong and lasted. They were the happiest when they turned old. So this is to say that sociability and interactions and how you develop strong relationships in your life in a city impact your mental health and your overall well-being. Now, the mundanity that most of us exist in the cities today results in higher rates of most of the mental health problems compared to when we compare to rural areas that are, that are more, that live more in a community design. Here in the cities, we are more becoming more individualistic in the way we live. So in the cities, the facts of the city life is that there is almost 40% higher risk of depression, 20% more for anxiety, double the risk for schizophrenia, loneliness. Even though we live in societies with hundreds of other people, yet we all feel lonely and isolated. And lastly, if I ask, how will you rate yourself on how stressed you are on a rating scale of 1 to say 5, then all of you probably would rate yourself around 3 or 4. Okay, so most of us are used to navigating through traffic jams on the way to work every morning, and on and off again think about spending a day or two probably eating out, going for a weekend trip, or looking at the sky out in your balcony. Overall, urban life is stressed and anxiety provoking. We may brush it away just as another day in the city, but it turns out that our surroundings impact us in more than one can imagine. Now, the COVID pandemic has highlighted the need to put people first and create livable cities, right? Perhaps we won't get another chance to relook at the design of our neighborhood and make post-COVID world more livable. So when COVID started, people started understanding the value of, what is a healthy life, what is well-being. They stopped for a minute and thought about how can I become more healthy, more resilient in my life. And all these examples, this is not to say that the city life is all that bad. A city life gives us education opportunities, various livelihood opportunities. It is easier to do small simple things in the city because of all the infrastructure that is available. But the cities have underlined the importance of the public realm of our health, both in keeping us in good health, such as infrastructures like park and friendly urban designs, and decreasing the risks of infections, such as having wider pedestrian paths to allow for social distancing. Okay, so it is not all that bad to live in the city, even though it has its stresses and other impacts. Now, I'll talk about the key component of well-being. One of the key component of well-being is social health. Without social health, all other components do not get a background to work, right? So humans have a basic need of social connections and network, which I think Rahigiri interventions and whatever they do is a good example of how society can come together on days and forget about their stresses in life and work on their well-being. Now, when you are in a social space, all the senses are activated. A strong memory is created and a bond is created with the people in the interaction, right? That's how attachments are developed and identities are developed, which is very important for your own mental and psychological health. In this, we understand that our immediate environment is very important. How we where we live, the kind of environment that exists over that place is very important. The spaces that we have, do we have spaces to go out, chill? Do we have parks around our place? All these things important. So there's an example of this 45-year-old woman who came from a very quiet space from the rural area and transferred to a metro city. What happened is she developed anxiety and depression. Why? Because she was not used to living such overcrowded places. Okay, so what did she need? She needed social support in this. Now, in this isolated lonely place, where one needs to have empathy, one needs to look at spaces from an empathetic point of view. So the most important ingredient of human happiness isn't money but social connections. And where do these social connections mainly happen? Are in public spaces. So a happy city is a social city overall. Lastly, these places have restorative benefits. They give us a sense of identity. Like if you're from Kolkata, there's an identity that is attached to you. If you're from Delhi, there's an identity that is attached to you. The place makes and shapes your identity as well. You do not exist irrespective of it. There's a sense of attachment. You belong to that place. The feeling of belonging is very important. It is there in Maslow's need for hierarchy as well. And overall, it gives you a satisfaction that you're living your life well. Okay. So these were the importance. Now I'll talk about an experiment that Charles Montgomery did in New York. It was called the Happy City experiment. In this experiment, he wanted to see whether a barren land, a barren space could be created for a happier engagement and interaction. Now, what did he do in this experiment? It was a 3-month-long experiment. What he did was he said, "Ki alone, it is not just that a design and architect is going to make a place happier." So he called other people in to help him design this happy place. So there was a psychologist that was called. There was a fashion technology professor that was called. There was a neuroeconomist that was called. There was an artist that was called. Now, what were the interventions that these people brought in? Was that the psychologist said that you need to give out hot chocolate to people that come to this space. What does hot chocolate do? So hot chocolate is warm. So in a cold New York night, when you hold something warm, then it becomes a stimulus for warm feeling. Okay, so this is what he brought in. Now the fashion technologist, what did she do? She brought this fabric that was heat sensitive. Now the heat sensitive, when somebody touched you, the color of the fabric changed. So there was a heart on the fabric and the color of the fabric changed. The artist brought a what do you call poster where on one side there was a palm of one person and the other side there was a palm of another person. Now these two were supposed to be strangers. Now you're supposed to put your palm on this poster till you became unstrangers. So this was called stranger unstranger intervention. Now the third person was Paul J. Zak. He was a neuroeconomist. Now for him the most important aspect of his intervention was release of oxytocin, which is a uh, feel good hormone that we have. Now, what intervention did he bring was hugs. So what they did was, when, in New York, which is such a hard city, so they did not actually expect that people will come and people will be a part of this initiative, but people did come, and overall it was a successful experiment. And what they found out was, before the experiment, they had conducted a survey where they said that should people who work in the nights, should they get a raise in their wages? And mostly 90% people said no, it is a hard city, you need to tough it up. But post this happier experience of this happier space that they had, most of them said no, they should get a raise in their wages. So this means that the environment that we are in, the space, if it is happy, lively, our mood is elevated, and we behave in a more positive and empathetic way. Now, the next thing I'll talk about is, within this only, he conducted another um, experiment on how environment impacts our behavior. Okay, so he got volunteers together and created these two boxes. One was a concrete immersion box, and the other was a nature immersion box. So in the concrete immersion box, since we are all social beings and we, need all our senses to be active, all senses of a concrete city were given to this person, where, he heard loud noises of cars honking and of all the noise pollution that is there in the city, right? And the nature immersion box was of the savanna jungles, the birds chirping, the water flowing, and those sounds were there. So what he found in the end was that, in the end, these volunteers were supposed to get $10 each for the 8 minutes they spent in this immersion box. Now, the result of this experiment was that he asked these people to share a bit of the money to give to a charitable initiative, right? So what happened is, people who heard noises, pollution, and were in concrete boxes, they said no. And the people who were in serene, calm, savanna kind of environment, they said, okay, fine, we don't mind sharing a bit of our money. So this means that in the city spaces, we need to create more natural settings, more green spaces, more healing spaces that will help, that impact a behavior in a positive way. Now, the next thing I would like to talk about is another experiment that was done by Colin Ellard. Okay. In this experiment, what he done is, he had placed these, arousal bands around the volunteers, around the volunteers, and they needed to walk throughout the city. In the experiment, they found that when people were in front of jumbled up, messier blocks, where there were small shops and people were interacting and moving around and, were, doing a lot of activities and was lively, people were a lot more happier than place which was, clean, blank space with glass walls and just space. Okay, so this proves that a lively place and a messier block where a lot of things are happening gives people a lot more happiness than other places. Now, we've come to an understanding that spaces have implication on health, happiness, and well-being, and how we behave. Okay, so now we'll talk about this a bit. Now, green spaces and access to nature, what it does to us, how it impacts our well-being and our health. So it's effective for general mental well-being. It reduces depression. Okay, reduces our stress levels, improves social and cognitive functioning, especially for people who have ADHD, that is attention deficit hyper disorder, and improve mood and reduce aggression for people with dementia. Now, how it works? Because these natural and green spaces, they promote exercise, promote a setting for social interactions, building social networks. Uh, there's a theory by Edward Wilson which is a biophilia theory, which is that humans have a biological need to be in contact with other species. So birds, other animals, dogs, insects, birds. So humans need to feel all these things here in order to have a sense of well-being. The third thing is stress reduction theory, which was given by Roger. He said that distance from everyday demand, aesthetics, appreciation, and attention driven by interest. These are important, and this is what green spaces and access to nature gives to us. And attention restoration, which facilitates us being more attentive without being without concentration. Okay, the next thing I'll talk about is how active space for exercise. Now this is a open gym in East Delhi. Now what is it effective for? How does exercising help us in an open space? It acts as an antidepressant, improves self-esteem and well-being. It helps us with our anxiety and stress. um, it helps, and even it helps us with schizophrenia, because in schizophrenia there are blunted emotions and loss of drive, this thinking difficulty. So when you go out in the open air and you exercise, that a lot of bodily and brain changes happen, which helps them. Now it also reduces, it also has physical impacts, as we all know. It helps us physically also. It reduces chances of cardiovascular diseases and diabetes. Now, how it works? Now, there are a few main theories about how exercise works. First is the biochemical. Exercise can increase, chemicals as serotonin, which is a chemical that is needed in improving mood. And it also may increase, in simple words, neurons in the brain. Okay, so it is very important for us to exercise, go out. It helps us with our sleep. Sleep is also very important for an overall well-being of our overall well-being. Exercise improves it, and it is a protective factor for mental health. Now, self-esteem. Exercise improves a sense of agency and accomplishment for undertaking a meaningful activity, and can be empowering. So in an exercise, we create tasks and small goals for ourselves, right? That this is what we are going to do. So it helps us develop self-esteem and a sense of that we'll be able to achieve something in a very subtle way. Okay, it helps us develop stress resilience, and exercise also gives us opportunity for positive social interaction. Now, pro social places to encourage positive social interaction. Now, how does this work? Social interaction builds our self-esteem, self-confidence, and empathy, right? It increases our feeling of support and belongingness in the community. It helps us cope with life challenges and mitigate feelings of loneliness, anxiety, and isolation. Regular social interactions can also improve cognitive function, particularly memory and intellectual performances. Now, what is the takeaway out of this is that, there's been tons of researchers and, tons of work and studies that have been done on how different kind of environments, impact people differently, and how people behave as per their environment, right? So what is the takeaway is, now all these things should come together, and it should come into practice. So city designers or architects must, in the beginning, be empathetic, and well-being should be considered as an objective from the very start of any project. In design, there should, I suggest that it'd be great if there's a nexus of neuroscience, psychology, architecture, and mental well-being. A place should boost activity and produce endorphins, that is, full feel-good chemicals between us. With this, I would like to thank everyone for giving me this opportunity to hold this session. Thank you so much.
Many thanks, Meeta, for your insightful presentation. Thank you for bringing the attention, much needed attention to health, happiness, and wellness. I think it is very important, to understand the psychological aspects of public spaces and the act of mere being in a public space, being surrounded by people, is itself quite inspiring and rejuvenating, and feeling connected to people and nature around is very, very important. We will now begin our exploratory discussion around the three play stories, and I invite questions from the audience. Atulya, are you going to take the questions?
Yes, ma'am. So I think Samya, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. No, actually, this was a very good presentation from all the speakers. And I would like to ask question from Dipshika ma'am and Shubhra ma'am. As design, I would like as designing public space in pre-COVID era. So there we had principles that livable cities, environment, person relations, society coming together, and etc. But now in this COVID era, due to this pandemic situation, what is happening right now? How will the public spaces be designed to meet this containment measures of COVID-19? And more specifically related to social distance, like you told us at the end that rethinking streets, right? So streets are public spaces. So how you are thinking of rethinking these streets again in this COVID era? What is the principle that you are applying? What is the implementation you are taking forward? So that is the question. Thank you.
Dipshika, would you like to take a
Thank
call
you.
on this?
Yeah. So I think public spaces have been there, but now after the COVID, we have realized that it is even more important, to have those public spaces, to go out and to see people around. In fact, we have had two cyclothons with GMDA, and then it's not very difficult to maintain that social distance, because you have a lot of space, and if people are coming out on their cycles and they are still at 6 feet distance, there are different sort of markings that are coming out, and people can still come out. So now emphasis has come much more on walking and cycling, the active commute, which the government is also putting a lot of focus at. Now that Cycles for Change and Streets for People program, the challenges have been floated by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, the value of public spaces have increased after COVID era, and to understand the long term usage or this duration of pandemic, it's a lot of public awareness and public understanding also, which is coming in uh, to use their public spaces in a certain manner. So people do want to come out. The culture has of course changed a little bit, people are adapting, but the emphasis on public spaces have increased.
Yeah, just
I would
adding
say.
to what Dipshika said, our focus is now on creating infrastructure for walking, creating infrastructure for cycling. In fact, during this time, the local administration of Gurugram has given Rahagiri Foundation 5 streets to make them more inclusive, to make them more sustainable. So there are 5 pilot streets that have been given away to Rahagiri Foundation under this collaboration. And an MOU has also been signed for this. So what I'm saying is that while the Rahagiri Day in its essence is not being celebrated, the focus on cycling and walking and on health has increased, and therefore it has boiled down to what do we need to do promote active health, and therefore the focus on walking and cycling is increased in this era. And therefore, though we're not celebrating Rahagiri Day as of now, we are focusing and using this opportunity to create this infrastructure and create awareness for this infrastructure.
In fact, in continuation to this question which Soumya has asked, I would also like to understand, Deepshika and Shubhra, from you, what would you, consider as the long-lasting impacts of your initiative? Because Rahagiri Day may be a celebration on a day, specific day, But what do you see as a change? I know there are things that Rahagiri Foundation has catalyzed, but other than that, do you see any changes in the way people have kind of gotten together and started in smaller initiatives on their own?
Ipshika, please take it.
Yes, I will. So, you know, the very basic essence of having Rahagiri Day is to make people experience the change in their neighborhood, on their local streets. The spaces can become something that they never imagined, and to foster that sense of relatedness to that infrastructure. Now, if you ask what people are doing, there are many RWA groups, there are many people initiatives that have come forward to have these smaller events. Of course, Rahagiri Day is like a full-fledged event where there are a lot of activities, but anyone and any group of people can come out and create just small benches there, just draw some pit to put some stones, put a ball, and you can use your space. So people have been doing this. Of course, we don't see a full-fledged formal, application of it by people. But then now the Streets for People initiative has been asking from RWA groups, and we have been receiving applications. There are many other smaller organizations also who try to activate these spaces, call it parking day, call it open street events. So a lot of these things have been happening, and people are, of course, reaching out through their RWAs and councillors and reaching out to their mayors to have their local Rahagiri, their smaller pop-up Rahagiris.
Right. Just to add to what Deepshika said, people are finding it safer to meet outside in masks. And therefore, you would see RWA people having some little 7, 8 people meeting outside in masks and, having a little picnic of sorts now. We started seeing that in Gurgaon. Also, Rahagiri Day is only one of the things, of Rahagiri Foundation. The Rahagiri Foundation is actually working to build capacity in the engineers, in the local administration, to change their approach to what they think is what road is about. So a lot of work is going around changing mindsets of citizens, of people in the city, of also of local administration, to what they see as streets and what they should see as streets in a future progressive modern city like Gurugram.
So, Atulya, do you have other questions as well?
Yeah, so I think the next question, how can pop-up Rahagiri be translated into long-term interventions? I think it has been partly answered. If you want to add on anything to it.
Yeah, a great example of pop-up going around these days is pop-up bicycle lanes, if you see. So these pop-up bicycle lanes are basically the trial and testing for a long-term intervention, right? So these are very good means to test your ideas. Bicycle lanes are one way. Create a small pop-up public space, get benches, get a chartwala there. You understand how it's functioning, if it's a good idea, if it's a bad idea, if it should be modified a little bit. This is how pop-up urbanism, a tool, works. And then you should, of course, a permanent execution takes a lot of effort. This is a test and trial, very beginning. Test it with a pop-up, and
also
then
we would like to see Rahagiri actually leading to lower accidents on roads and lower fatalities on roads. We would want to see Rahagiri leading to see women feeling safe, and not just safe, empowered. So these are the long road aheads for Rahagiri. Just to add to what Deepshika said.
There, Pallas Srivatsava also suggests that in the designing of public spaces, there should also have a signature of the local community to relate to it. Once.
Surely. Yeah, that's quite a valid.
Atulya, Palash actually wants to ask the question himself.
Sure. Please, sir, you can please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Yeah, I think excellent presentations, Mr. Hajela, and also Deepshikha and Meeta. I would actually like to explore a point where between the two of you, Mr. Hajela and Meeta, the identity of a place. You know, you brought out a very from a say town to gaon kind of a relationship between what emerged in Roorkee and possibly uh, people who actually grew up and basically trained at the institute in Roorkee still feel a sense of pride. And I think Neeta was also exploring that point of view, saying that, you know, there is a certain kind of identity that the community, local community actually feels in being related to. So I'm actually exploring the behavioral aspect, because I think the hard aspect on the Rahagiri initiative has actually a very powerful and has evoked a lot of, you know, connection. However, from the nuanced say Roorkee say kind of emergence of places around Roorkee, and how does it actually psychologically or behaviorally it impacts. I would like to explore with both of you. So whoever wants to go first, please.
Hi, I think I'll go first. So, you know, when, as I said, you know, everybody who comes from a certain place has an identity that is attached to that particular region or that location that they come from. And what it creates for them is a sense of belongingness. Okay. Now, when you belong to a certain, you know, culture or a certain community or a certain region, and when you are familiar with it and you meet somebody from that particular identity, you know, it is very easy for you to bond, to connect, to create that social connection and interact with that person, right? So when this does not happen, when you do not feel what you call a sense of belonging, then it might result in a you know feeling left out, FOMO as they say in today's slang language. And you know other mental health issues might come up, probably you know that could be taken care of at a later stage, but it does impact our psychological health, and the way our self-esteem is also impacted. How we connect with other people, we might become more we might draw back, because there is no sense of connection that we feel in that particular new context. Okay, so it is very important to recognize that, and probably even be confident about speaking about your own identities, your place identities. Probably more awareness of different ethnic groups together, you know that those identities can be promoted, and a space for everybody can be created where people with their own identities or spaces can come out and feel more empowered and confident. I think Palashji, I think I've answered the question that you were pointing or hinting at.
Yeah. Thank you. I think Hajela Saab, I think
Yes, I'd like to
the issue
answer
of identity,
query
esteem, self-esteem, yeah, that is something which needs to be.
What I would like to share with you, that there's a very different kind of culture that evolves in small towns. It's the social bonding amongst the people that's very significant. And I think this is something that is what my experience is, and I think most people who have stayed in a small town like Roorkee, which was essentially a university town, and the kind of culture that evolved in that place had a lot of those interactions and conversations that people had either on the streets or onto the public places, which were very intellectual in nature. And they gave birth to so many interesting research projects, or maybe studies which happened. And usually any meeting or any encounter would translate into a very interesting intellectual conversation, and that translated into a lot of collaboration. And this is something which we have begun to talk now, but that existed almost decades ago in these cities. So it was the culture that evolved in that place, and people were empathetic to each other. That is something which was the critical value that one learns from these smaller towns and cities, where the sensitivity towards each other is supreme. And people wish to collaborate, people wish to share, people wish to get across to each other, and then they find great meanings in those kinds of spaces where they interact. So it is those streets, those squares, those edges, and also coming and bringing people together on same platforms through series of events that happen. So I think it's three things which are important: place, the memory, and the identity that it gets subsequently. The memory of that place, to me, is very significant, because, and that is also critical for people involved in the design of public realm. I think the association of a place, it should be considered prime in terms of any intervention that we make into our urban fabric. So in case we invest into the associations of the people and their memories, then I'm sure we are going to create more inclusive, more democratic spaces, and probably it would also be a reflection of the culture of the place. The significant implication of this urbanization and transformation is that we are losing the culture of the place by virtue of everything is a look-alike kind of condition. But there are some very salient features which are reflected in different ways, either in terms of activities or the building types or building forms, or the way these interact with each other, that we need to be engaging with. And that should be the prime consideration when we design for public realm. And probably there's a great learning that how we reinforce these associations. And probably reinforcing those associations is like reliving your life again with those great memories that you had once upon a time. And that is something what people, anybody who has stayed in a small town like Roorkee, or maybe any other town for that matter, would always want to go back to that place. And it is that kind of a collective memory that becomes significant in our minds, and that we cherish, whether we stay at that place or we don't stay at that place. So probably creating those memories and those associations and reinforcing through our interventions probably would make a very significant contribution to the social capital of this country. And anything that you want to do in India has to be done with people. It has to be, it has to shift its gear and a new paradigm of engaging with people. Any successful engagement in this country can only happen through engagement with people. So in case we invest in people, we invest in the kind of demographic dividend that we have, probably we are going to create many meaningful places and places for the people. And this demands a critical shift in our approach from a very logical, critical thinking way of dealing with people. I think we need to move to design thinking, which is more user-centric. So I hope this should make things clear.
Yeah, no, I think very succinctly, you captured how the facelessness of urbanism and the metropolitanism is actually basically, I don't know if it lies in the mohallas or the traditional construct. I'm quite excited with the interventions that have been made today, and thank you all the three of you. I'm really so glad that this series is going and exploring all these issues which are so meaningful and which will make our lives more fruitful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Palash. I think I'll just, kind of add to what Sir was just mentioning about, associations. I think familiarity is a very important aspect when it comes down to, feeling connected and identifying with the place. This is something which probably in metro cities we usually miss because most of the people are, new to the city. There's a lot of, moving of people from between cities. So I think if celebration, just coming to mind is that, celebrations can be, events can be one such occasion where people actually get to know each other, because there is some kind of hesitance in, interacting with people in your neighborhood. This is, I think, a very recent phenomena. Traditionally, I think people would just, kind of meet the other person on the street and start a conversation and, connect with each other. So I think events like Raggery Day and such other, initiatives actually give us that opportunity to interact, to familiarize with each other and to know each other, which is very important for, placemaking and connecting. One just last, I think, quick question to Meeta. Meeta, you very well brought out, the aspects of health, happiness, and wellness. One thing which is coming to my mind as to how we can work on this in our personal lives is maybe somewhere we know we need to slow down the pace of our life, just like the slow movement across Europe, slow food movement where you actually cook your food, eat it as a collective group. So I think somewhere the pace at which we are living our lives in that, especially in bigger towns, metropolitan cities, I think somewhere we need to kind of reduce that, maybe create some kind of a daily routine for ourselves where we actually pause. One thing which comes to my mind is, changing the mode of transport. Like, for example, we choose by not to travel by a car or walk down for our daily activities. That should be one way of connecting and interacting with people who we come across on the street. What do you think about this, Meeta? Would you like to add to this?
I think what I like to add to this is that since now we've, majorly in the metro cities, specifically, people in my generation started living in silos. Okay, they have a group of say one or two odd people they hang out with, but they're very uncomfortable meeting new people. So probably in our daily schedules or probably our quarterly schedules, we can create a day where we go out of our what you call comfort zone and probably go out and interact. And the best way to do this is probably get involved in a pro-social activity. Go out, do a charity event, go and go out and help people. So I think that is very important. And another thing is that we all need to, from what you're saying is that we need to slow down the pace of our life, is that we all need to understand that the real happiness is not the amount of money we have or how big our house is, but whether we have someone around us or not, is to where if we have a close relationship, whether we have somebody as a companion with us or not. Okay, so ultimately we need to figure out what in life makes us happy today. Okay, eventually what will I have at the end, and whether what we are running after today is going to give us happiness in the end or not. Okay, so today I buy a big Louis Vuitton bag, but it just vanishes within 5 minutes. Okay, I have a car today, I bought a new car, Creta, and then within like a day it holds no value for me because it is not attached to our emotions. Okay, it doesn't invoke any personal people related emotions, right? So we need to all slow down, probably take 5 minutes off, 10 minutes off, reflect. It can be a weekly activity. So this is a activity that is done in positive psychology. Okay, where you take out you write a journal, you take out all your strengths and all the happy things that have happened to you, and try to figure out where you can build how you can use your strengths out in the world. Okay, so you can take out 5-10 minutes in everyday life, write a journal about what good things happened to you, or today these are the 3 positive things that have happened to me today. So that basically brings you back to the ground. You get anchored somewhere about what really matters to you.
Yeah, quite true, quite true. Atulya, I think there's one last question. Can you please ask the question?
Yes, Pavan Sharma, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question, please? Are you here? Okay, I'll do it. No? I think I'll just read it out. How can we segregate vehicular and pedestrians in old cities where a row of streets has no margins? Yes, not written to whom it is directed to.
Yeah, so I think what Amit Hajela ji actually showed us, the example of Chandni Chowk, it is a classic example of how, through better design, we've been able to segregate the two. And I'm sure Mr. Hajela can throw some more light on it, but it is possible through better design and through better project management. Yeah.
Just to answer you, I think it's more important to appropriate places for people than for automobiles. I think we have seen from the Chandni Chowk example and also the Karol Bagh example that how the space was actually being occupied by parking and parking of vehicles. And now when these have been moved out and there are different strategies which can be deployed, there are tactics which can be deployed, which could ensure better walkability, better pedestrianization, and reclaiming places for people, which again would become a democratic space. It becomes an inclusive space, which also ensures that people from all walks of life get an equal opportunity. So there's an equity in the space that we generate. And as long as we are able to generate that equity, we will be able to create the inclusive environments. And probably there are various ways and means by which the two can be segregated. And we have options of using a lot of these non-motorized systems of transport for those who are differently abled and still make the places accessible for those who have different kinds of abilities or who have issues for accessing these places. So I'm sure within the kind of existing framework, we have opportunities to intervene with the right kind of strategies and to create spaces for people and bring people together and make more vibrant public spaces.
Thank you, sir,
Yeah.
and thank you, Shubhra, for responding to the question. I think I would like to, in the end, thank Professor Dr. Amit Hajela, Deepshika Sinha, Ms. Shubhra Puri, and Ms. Neeta Mishra for sharing their stories, experiences, and very insightful learnings for us. There are very strong takeaways from this session. I hope the audience would have, taken inspiration from each of the stories. Do stay tuned for our next special story session on public space as a common resource scheduled for 27 December 2020 from 5 p.m. onwards. Our subject experts for the session are Professor Ekta Gyani, architect and landscape architect, Sushant School of Art and Architecture, Sushant University, Ms. Preeti Chauhan, Associate Professor, Department of Architecture and Planning, Indira Gandhi Delhi Technical University for Women, Mr. Lalit Kishore Bhati, architect and urban planner, co-founder, Path Architects Planners, Auroville. The registration links for the session 3 will be shared shortly. I would just like to, make a very short appeal on behalf of our organization. CATS is a not-for-profit organization working in the area of heritage conservation and management and advocacy since 2001. We have been working with a vision to highlight local heritage assets, empower local communities, and make heritage conservation participatory and sustainable. An effort such as ours requires technical and financial assistance as well as patronage. You can support and participate in our multiple initiatives and programs by volunteering your skills and contributing financially. Your donation, however small it may be, can help us together contribute to the conservation and protection of our fast disappearing, unprotected, and hitherto unknown heritage assets. Donations to CATS entitle donors to get a tax exemption because we are an ATG organization. For volunteering your skills, please write to us at info@catsindia.org. You can also support us by buying a newly launched range of heritage souvenirs called Aresh that raises awareness about unprotected heritage assets in our cities and towns. To begin with, we have shared some of the very remarkable frescoes from Shekhawati. Do visit the Heritage Craft Collection on our website, www.indiaheritagehub.org. Once again, I personally thank each one of you for your participation and support to the Festival of Places. Look forward to meeting all of you again next Sunday, same time, same place. Until then, stay happy and stay safe. Thank you.